Welcome to Teams Tuesday, a podcast about mastering the best about what other people have already figured out. Teams Tuesday focuses on insights and lessons that never expire. You will walk away from every episode with actionable insights that help you get better results and be more productive.
This was about as bizarre and easy as it gets.
The client just couldn't make up their mind.
I feel like we had top.
Went from a project of 20 weeks to just 2.
The DevOps was a cultural shift.
This is Teams Tuesday with your host, Peter Ward.
Welcome to Teams Tuesday. It's 12:15 here in New York. Our guest speaker, Chirag Patel. You're based in the UK, and I'm assuming it's something like about 5:15 or 6:15 where you are. What time are we talking about?
Yeah, absolutely right. 5:15 and 30 degrees. Hottest day of the year.
Hottest day of the year. I suppose it is. All right, so we'll just do a quick warm up a little bit here while a few people are piling in. So you're basically a great speaker and MVP, and you're based in London. And with that being said, I would probably say fellow hometown. What part of London are you actually from?
I'm from Harrow, Northwest London.
Northwest London. Okay, I'm familiar with that. Okay, and how many years have you been an MVP now?
This is my second year, so still a baby, I guess, in the MVP community.
Who is the oldest serving MVP that you know then? Huh? I know Christian Buckley, I think he's a 10-year-old guy.
Yeah, I think Penny Coventry, who I follow very closely, who written books on SharePoint Designer and other SharePoint related books. I think she's about 15 years, I think.
Yeah, I actually have her books, actually. I just keep them sort of like as almost like trophies, actually, some of my SharePoint books.
I've got them. I've got a couple of them from Bill English and Ben Curry and others.
All right. So if you have any questions, feel free to push them in through the chat window. I'll field them. I'll actually promote them up. Tell us a little bit about your family and yourself.
Yeah, sure. I'm married to teenage children and wife. And yeah, kind of been here in London for just about over 30 years. And yeah, kind of working with Microsoft 365 in various studies. Okay.
And you're originally from Kenya and then you in India. That's correct?
Yeah, that's right. So I grew up in Kenya for about 10 years, and then I moved to India for 5 years and decided to then settle in the UK.
Right. Okay. So where in India were you?
In India, I was in Gujarat, near Ahmedabad city.
Okay. Yeah, that's where we have our office.
Small village. Yeah.
And what was the name of the village?
Vidyanagar, Bakro, near Anand. So it's all one big city now compared to what they were before. So yeah, growing as fast as they are, I think, with all the communities and work-wise. So it's a huge city now itself. So that village is now dissolved.
Well, yeah, like Ahmedabad has about 8 million people in now. Like when you were there, how big was it then?
That's been many years. I have no idea. It does feel crowded then.
Okay. And in terms of I believe you do a bit of long distance cycling, is that right as well?
Yes, that's right. I used to until I had an accident a couple of years ago. So it was a way to just kind of, keep myself fit and also do things for charities. In the UK, we have so many cycling events. In particular, the one I focused on was with the British Heart Foundation charity, the London to Brighton, which is probably one of the popular bike rides. So I did about 5 of those.
I have heard that. All right, so there you go, your Lance Armstrong titanium bicycle, is that right?
I kept it really rough and ready and natural, really, just a mountain bike with fat tires and really kind of struggling my way to finish that in about 6-7 hours.
Right, is that how long it takes?
55 miles.
From London to Brighton, how long does it take to get from London to Brighton then?
Yeah, so it's about 60 miles. That's sort of roughly, I think, 80 kilometers or so. And yeah, it took me about 7 hours with lunches and breaks and what have you.
All right. Okay. Yeah. So in terms of a typical day, what time do you typically get up and how do you actually start your day?
Yeah, I mean, the day tends to be lengthier. I typically wake up around 5 in the morning, start off with a kind of lovely cup of chai with masala tea, with some pieces in it. And really kind of get most of my work done in the early hours, really up to about 9. By that time, obviously, then I'm kind of really freed up for half a day or so. And then throughout the day, I just kind of pick and choose my hours. If I'm working on a project, that can be different. But yeah, otherwise, it's kind of doing bits of community related work, a bit of work-wise work, or learning some new technologies, or reading up some new articles. So it tends to be a very varied, certainly from Monday to Wednesdays.
Do you, like here I'm based in New York, and then when I'm in the UK, I end up working a very extended day because I'll get up and then I'm online by 8 a.m., which of course means I've got like a good, almost like 5 or 6 hours of India.
Yeah.
And then the US wakes up, and then I'm working with the US. So if I'm not careful, it's like a 15, 16-hour day here.
Yes, easily. That can easily happen. That's happened to me a few times, and yeah, that's kind of really the strike of the balance, isn't it? Really, which days you pick, right?
So you said you work from what, Monday to Wednesday, is that right?
So Monday to Fridays, but Monday to Wednesdays tends to be my intensive work days,
Okay.
and Thursday, Friday kind of just goes down, just purely for the personal well-being, really, and making sure that I get all the attention, especially to the family and everything else. So yeah.
Well, okay. And like in terms of like, let's just talk about yourself and work related. What was your first job out of college?
I was a salesman, so I worked in a kind of a retail store,
Okay.
selling TV, video, hi-fis.
Selling. Okay. So was it? This is on the high street. Was it? Or who's this?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Just a high street store in a team, especially on Saturdays used to be the busiest days, and really just kind of, customer service kind of assistance really, until I found a proper job.
So what year was this then?
Oh, this is going back around mid 90s, 90. Yeah, I think 96. Just when I graduated from my first degree in chemistry.
So was that when like people was buying satellite dishes from the retail stores?
Yeah, satellite receivers and dishes, everything else. Yes.
Okay. This was the days before flat screen TV, clearly.
Absolutely, bulky TVs.
All right. Okay. It's funny. We have someone at HD who works at Soho. He's actually based in Pakistan, but he studied in the UK. But he used to work at Argos, which is like a mail order thing now, selling stuff. Which retail store were you working at?
At the time, this was called Alders. Alders, so it was a chain retail store. Yeah, then they got dissolved as the years moved on, especially the digital age kind of kicked in.
It's funny, like in the UK, you got like a store like the Carphone Warehouse, which is a weird name because nobody has car phones anymore. But that's one of the biggest sort of like cell phone stores in in Europe.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't know how closely all their stories, and I think they've had their lots of ups and downs and all the business sell-offs and everything else, and yet still, even today, they still prove to be the popular, trusted source to certainly get the devices and SIM cards and things from there. So still popular as ever.
Did you ever own a Windows phone?
No, I stayed away from it.
Okay, so you're an MVP here, and you stayed away from the Windows phones here. Okay, it's all coming out here. My notes on this one. Okay.
Absolutely. I think for me, it's always it's a balance of between loyalty versus effectiveness, and I just felt Windows Phone was just not effective as much as other tech that there is. So yeah.
This is a Windows Phone here on my desk here, the phablet. Oh, wow. I haven't used the thing in years. Okay, it doesn't work. A phablet, Nokia. Okay, I've actually got a few devices here. I've got the Evo and an iPad. So what was your first version of SharePoint you used?
2001. Portal Server 2001. Quickly started off with Team Services to begin with. Soon after that, just as a department websites, if you like.
Okay.
Yeah.
I started off with SharePoint 2003, and you had Portal Server, and then you had the team sites below it. What was going on below? What's 2001? So
what we had is we were one of the early adopters at the time when Content Management Server was around, and this is the times when I was at the Salvation Army, which is where my SharePoint career kind of began. And so there we were in the midst of working with SharePoint Portal 2001, Content Management Server 2002, then obviously Portal Server 2003 came along, with some of the best bits kind of getting amalgamated, some of it to it, until 2007. So we were in the midst of rolling out the team sites as well as the intranet sites for various churches and social centers around the UK through that. So that's pretty much where we came from a team sites background, and eventually evolved into the intranets as well.
Now, did you do actually any development in Portal Server 2001?
Not at all, no. No. So kind of funny, the development story side of things, especially the early days from that, especially ASP.NET and all these things. So we kind of kept it very much as out of the box, and was very limited at that time anyways.
No, I know, yeah.
Trial side of things anyways. So we kind of flew with team services, if you like, to begin with, only because it was simple to manage and with the limited resources that we had at the time. So yeah, very limited. Yeah, and I doubt it very much if anybody did develop any solutions on Portal Server 2001.
Okay, because I remember at the time I was working at Unilever in about 2001, and we had front page, and I remember looking at Portal Server, and I just recognized the directories, and I just thought, I got the impression this is really just an extension of front page.
Yeah.
Okay, is that correct, or is that a somewhat correct assumption?
I wouldn't be 100% sure, but certainly it kind of made sense in terms of the modularized based approach of developing something that was quite beastly of a product compared to, say, front page.
What was your last challenging project, and why?
It's the migration. So I do a lot of migrations, especially SharePoint migrations. The specific one was more around the actual Microsoft 365. So not just SharePoint, but also Teams and OneDrive and everything else. And partly one of the challenges there is the lack of skills that still exists in various end user organizations. You have limited resources working on covering variety of workloads like Exchange and SharePoint. And then with the migration side of things, it's even more challenging because of the fact nobody knows about the data or what moves within the organization from a data perspective.
What's your preferred migration tool of use?
I use quite a few actually. I think obviously the likes of ShareGate, that always comes at the top purely from a cost perspective. If it's through the customizations, which I work through many, then there are some bespoke tools there as well. But I think ShareGate, AvePoint as well from a security compliance perspective. AvePoint does a good job there. And then yeah, I've had the joys of working with even MetaVis and Metalogics in the former days.
Oh yeah, MetaVis is now Metalogics. So in terms of okay, so here's a question for you. So you got a choice of where would you choose ShareGate and AvePoint? Where would you sort of say, all right, this is why I'll choose AvePoint, this is why I'll choose ShareGate?
I don't like to use the word depends.
Depends, okay.
But what you normally get, what I find, at least from my experience, is when you have organizations who are using kind of a plethora of tool sets like the backups and backup services as well as management suite, then typically they get bought into buying something for the migration tooling itself, certainly from the on-prem or external sources like using DocHave tools. But if you've got something where you're not concerned by some of those management tools or backups, and you just want a straightforward migration experiences, then ShareGate tends to tick a lot of boxes, and also from a licensing perspective, because obviously with AvePoint, some of their products obviously they cost you by the data that you use.
Have you ever tried to just use PowerShell to basically, I won't say muscle it now, but now there's just so much PowerShell out there for migration. Do you ever try if you do a migration, would you ever use just raw PowerShell?
I think if we had the luxury of time, if we knew exactly what's being migrated, and for sure, yes, cheap and cheerful, right? I think using PowerShell, and I think it does a good job of it, and certainly even using the PNP initiative, PNP PowerShell scripts around that, and that would certainly work. And I think really it depends on the scale of the challenge we have, isn't it, with the data side of things, whether it's the entire sites or just parts of the document libraries or folders, kind of really depends. But if you get into that areas of the whole permission management, the structures of the libraries and files, folders, then in a way you can kind of do without using PowerShell, knowing that the tool that's already been supported, if things go wrong, then you have a better chance of being kind of having a peaceful sleep, if you like, working with the migration tools. Whereas with PowerShell, you kind of really need to understand how SharePoint works and the hierarchy of the data that is held within that system. So
sure,
it varies.
Why was this migration challenging so much? Like a migration, lift and shift, what could go wrong?
You know what? I think most of the time it does work, right? I think what the client organization trying to do is they wanted to introduce a transformation opportunities within that migration experience. So in a way that we had a custom solution, a framework that was already laid out by another vendor, which in terms of we were kind of limited by how much we can innovate through the all the experiences we get coming from Microsoft. So one of the areas around that was the intranet side of things, where we know that we have the likes of HomeSite, and we got the Teams, Viva connections, and all these wonderful out-of-the-box experiences we get now. And so they wanted to kind of transform that. And then now when they talk about transformation, that itself means across all the content, the change that's involved, the experiences, everything else. So that was part of the challenge, because it was more a case of we can get all the best of the bits that we can in our target environment, but while still being able to maintain the key functionalities that we had on the source environment. That wasn't really defined, because, and in the sense that it was not just an intranet as a source of the migration, but more about the file content, the document management system areas, and the intranet was just more of a side, a complementary capability.
Yeah,
had to be transformed. So that was really left as a low priority, if you like. And yeah, obviously with the time and the budgets.
Do you ever find it's difficult to get the business to just clean up after migrations and check all their work, or delete stuff they don't want to delete?
I think it's important. I personally make sure, in a sense, that with every project, because the focus is always about getting the migrated content across, and it's just a copy. At the end of the day, it's just a copy and paste job, right? At the highest level. And the question is always asked, what happens at the source data? Do we delete it? Do we keep it for, say, 3 months and then delete it afterwards? The retention policies, all those things that might exist in the place, how does that get deleted or cleared up, including the audits, if you like, as well. So there's a whole stack of those areas which the business will never kind of really commit to it, in a sense that it needs to be secure, it needs to be compliant. But then it's a project requirement to at least get that validated, to say after the migration, for X period of time, that data needs to be deleted, or it just needs to be archived, or whichever the conditions are. So typically working with side-by-side basis makes the job at least a lot more easier to understand what stays behind, what gets deleted.
Right. Okay. All right. Okay. So in terms of, let's talk about demo. Every presenter does a good demo. Okay. You're going to do a demo on your compliance actions, sensitivity labels, and DLPs. Okay. So yeah, just very quickly for average person, briefly describe what is a sensitivity label.
It's the value of your content. Essentially, is it of highest value or lower value? And it's really what you want to protect, that information or files, data in your Teams environment or SharePoint.
Okay, DLP, what is that?
Preventing unwanted data leaving your organization. So credit cards is a good example of that, leaving through your organization, so it can block it, prohibit, or put restrictions around it.
Okay, all right, so let's see the demo then. Let's see the sizzle.
In terms of the demos, so we look at the sensitive labels, DLPs, but also we'll cover very briefly the compliance manager as well, which basically helps to understand your kind of the scoring side of things for your environment that you have within that. Going from that, one of the things to bear in mind, especially from Teams within that, although the sessions about the security compliance in Teams, but it does affect if you have anything that's based on Microsoft 365 groups as well. So that's like your typical team sites that you may have in SharePoint. So it does touch a lot of those areas, or even if you created a planner and all those things.
What do you mean by confidence? I can see Teams dependencies, communication, customize, SPFX, web parts, collaborate. You don't see that word confidence much on
it. And that is it. That's your security and compliance side of things. So really doesn't matter whether it's your own device or corporate devices, based on those protection controls, the whole security and compliance, not just unique to Teams, but the entire stack from the Microsoft 365 security and compliance covers Teams as well. So whatever the policies you may have, it equally comes across to your Teams if they were configured. And so that's what I'm bearing in mind as a bigger picture side of things from Microsoft 365 groups. You do have the good old challenge around, certainly from some of the projects that I've seen, where project gets delivered, all the new functionalities, the new capabilities, and security and compliance sometimes tends to be treated as either phase 3 or phase 4 of the overall program. But obviously, as we know in this day and age, it needs to be done. It needs to be secure by design from day one. So yes, the whole environment is secure. It's what Microsoft does to to help us that out. But there are things in there which, as an end user organization, we have to do things like understanding the identities, the device management, information cloud app, and usually yes, IT is the central of it. Who's going to press all those buttons and configurations and all those things? The challenge typically lies, what does legal do versus what the security officers do. Some organizations don't even have that. So it's kind of really understanding what's the business, technical, and project requirements in order to bring those things together. That's the one side of the story, just to understand that who actually owns the security and compliance pieces of Microsoft Teams. And then you look at Microsoft Teams, with all the things that they're announcing and all the features. These are typically around about 25 of security, compliance, privacy features. You probably wouldn't switch all of them on, but certainly when you look at from a user perspective, you've got your typical users who will, either they're meeting organizers or they're team owners, and there are some elements of control that they can do themselves in order to make sure that, for example, chats are disabled or attendees can't share videos. All those things can be done by your end users, and that's your end user level there itself, or as a team owner. But then you got your Teams administrator who can then have further controls in the Teams admin center to create policies to be able to either allow or block third-party apps or any kind of integrations around that, or even being able to control that guest access across your entire Microsoft 365 group in terms of whether they can create channels or not, and all those things.
So you talk about recording consent. Okay, that's more just at the start of a meeting, just asking that, I'm assuming, correct?
Yeah, exactly. That's right. So because some organizations will want to have that disabled altogether, so you can't record at all, but that consent element of it, as well as the terms of use as well. If a guest is accessing your Teams environment, all those things is all part of your privacy and compliance in a way that you kind of cover yourself with that. But when you look at the remainder of this list, and again, it's just, these are kind of some of the areas that will go across, but like sensitivity labels and DLP, like we mentioned, but there's a whole raft of it where you can then pave your way as an organization in terms of what gets rolled out in 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months. And some of it is dependent on your licensing as well. So, things like the cloud app security or MCAS, e-discovery, some of those features are kind of E5 licensing, if you like. So some of those will be in E3. Even within the sensitivity labels, we know that you can, which we'll look at that in a sec. Then you got those areas which Teams chat messages, for example, if you want to have those things protected, then that requires an E5 license. So that feature fundamentally will not work with your E3 licensing if you had. So you got all those things to bear into mind. But this is kind of really a very quick overview of the type of things you can do in Microsoft Teams from a security perspective.
Okay, in plain English, let's just look at this then.
This is the one I use even for my client organizations. Typically, where do you start from? Where do you finish? What is it you're trying to protect? What are the simplest things that you can do? And I've put the link over there, which is a very good resource from Microsoft. You get the Excel spreadsheet. Essentially, it's for the business decision makers that really clearly outlines the type of policies, the impact it can have on your environment, but also the licensing side of things as well, in order to where you roll that out. So we know typically MFA is the standard, no doubt about that. Your admin accounts, they should be obviously MFA admin protected. For some of the things, you may decide to introduce privileged identity management kind of capabilities, so that they can only do things for say an hour or 2, whichever you decide. Whether to allow that into your mobile apps or tablets, whether you just allow corporate devices, all those things, whether it's using conditional access policies. But this is kind of, if you like, kind of the top 11, if you like, items that you can kind of cover off to make sure that you can get the best protection out of your Microsoft Teams security. So there's the whole thing's in there, and this is just basically an area that we're going to cover around the sensitivity labels side of things in terms of how that works in reality.
Okay.
So let's look at that, and I go to my demos. So hopefully you can see that.
See a PowerPoint. Okay, I do see it. Yep. Compliance Manager PowerPoint. Now the Teams. Very nice.
Good, excellent. So yeah, if I come into my team side of things, so if I was to go and create just standard team-wise, okay, I'll just talk through it now, just before it loads up. So a couple of things I'm trying to do here. So I want to create a team, and instead of just choosing whether it's a public team or where everybody can edit the content or a private team chat space. So when I create one of those teams, then before that I get prompted in terms of what kind of level of content in terms of the label, sensitivity label is going to have. So I've got a couple of labels: confidential projects and highly confidential. So without creating a team, it forces me to select what to classify that content. So if I pick a confidential project, then it's only going to give me an option to create a private team, because that's the option that I've set. So once I get this loaded, I can show you those through. And as far as team creation goes, that's pretty much as far as I will go in terms of making sure that the whole team, not just the files or folders within that team itself, but the entire team itself is classified as highly confidential.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the benefit of doing that, of course, is that being able to then put some controls in place where potentially I can't externally share any content. So that's one of the things. But if I go back to my teams, which is
So if a team is highly confidential, what are the things you can't do? I can't take. Can I extract the file out of the team? Can I do that and save it to the desktop?
No, you can prevent from doing that. Absolutely, you can prevent from the downloads or even kind of other restrictions they can put in place. Or if it requires a encryption, for example, on those files, then potentially all those things you won't be able to do based on that definition there. So I'm just going to head over to the compliance. So I can just go through the wizard from there that I got set up. Teams is loading, so I'm not going to show you now, but I think hopefully you get the idea that if you create a team, it's going to ask you for that itself. In terms of what options you pick. So if I go to information protection on the left-hand side, if I go into within my M365 compliance, so I've got a few labels here. I've got personal, general, and confidential finance. So you can see the scope there is just for the files and emails. But then I've also got a couple of others, highly confidential, that's using not just file and emails, but also is taking care of the whole team SharePoint team side, the whole container, if you like. So it's doing that at the container level. And that's kind of as far as the label goes. But once I've got my labels in place, then I can set those policies up in order to have that enforcement in place.
So you set the labels up within the team or in like Teams admin?
So this is outside of Teams altogether. This is within Microsoft 365 compliance as an admin center for it.
Okay. So these labels will go across into Outlook, SharePoint, and Teams.
Correct.
Okay, the entire tenant.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So if I go and pick one here now, highly confidential policy, edit policy, and we'll just quickly go through that wizard. So I've got a couple of labels in there, Project Falcon, highly confidential. You can have more than one labels binded to the policy. And if I then click next, I can then choose the groups of people or teams, whichever it is, to target specific areas for that policy, and that's one of the flexibilities there. I then go into settings. Then within here, then obviously I've got being able to either apply the label, polish, provide justification, all those things within that. And once I've got in there, then obviously I can just name my policy and do all those things. So that's from a policy perspective. Once I go in here, then I've got my labeling itself, which is the labels that I created earlier for the sensitivity labels. So if I go in next on that, I don't want to have a default labels, but I could if I wanted to. I don't want to have default label to the groups. Nothing for the Power BI settings, that's in preview. And I can have my policy there. So from that perspective, my labels there already kind of with the policy setup. So if I just go back.
Now, if you apply a policy and you change the rules, I'm assuming that gets pushed out to everything as well, don't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you clone policies?
You can copy those policies, have the sub policies within that itself. Yes.
Right.
So if I go into my labels here, if I go and pick that highly confidential label within that, so we were at the policies first in terms of target the user groups and everything else. If I come to the label itself, the label definition for that, if I go and quickly edit that label, so name of the policy and the scope here, I've got files, emails, groups and sites. And in terms of groups and sites, out of the box, that will not get enabled. There are some PowerShell scripts you have to run in order to enforce and enable that label publishing in the first place, so that these labels can become, so that part of Wizard would become visible.
Why do you need to run PowerShell scripts? If this all looks like Wizard-like, why do you need to run PowerShell scripts?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's this area here that out of the box experience, you get your files and emails checkbox. Groups and sites will be grayed out. And through this interface, there is no way of enabling that until running the PowerShell script, which I'll show you in a sec, which is basically enforcing that experience for this checkbox to become alive. And that's just the way this part of the wizard actually works itself. So because I've run that PowerShell script already, which then enables this labeling to come alive, only then I'm able to apply the label to the various team sites or team chat spaces across the board. So
right.
The first part of the wizard is obviously files and emails, which is a standard that we get. So whether we want to encrypt the files and have the watermark and all those things within that. But if we go across, and that's obviously, because I've got encryption checks, so I've got all those options in there. But the one that I want to focus on is specifically on the groups and sites. So I'm just quickly going to forward this to that part of the wizard. So I'm just going to do a couple of quick next. Don't want the auto labeling in there. Yeah, it was just this part here. There we go. So you got a couple of areas for that, groups and sites. First of all, being able to protect from external user access settings. So you can actually enable external sharing from here with conditional access settings, as well as the groups and sites itself. So if I go to the next again, I've got my usual external sharing settings there, and I just quickly missed one. So I'm going back. I have to come out of that one. Just go to the slides quickly. That's probably the easiest way. So yeah, I think in terms of the compliance manager, that gives you the overall assessment around what specific actions you may want to take for your teams or other areas, and being able to then work out. The idea is not to get 100% for your score, but enough to make sure that you're kind of compliant around that. You can use templates that's available. Some of them are E5. So whether you want to have the ISO 27001 or other standards, and therefore the necessary actions you'll get presented in there. Try to show one of the areas which I couldn't show, so I apologize for that. But overall, these are the capabilities you have within that control of the labels.
All right. Okay. Very good. We're just almost like running out of time here.
Yes, no, absolutely.
Appreciate that. Thanks so much.
Demo got the one more with me. Apologies.
No problem. If you send me a link of the slides, I'll get them up on our website. But thank you very much for being our guest on the.
No, will do. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks.